Okay everyone, today we're going to be seeing if it would be actually possible to launch yourself into orbit using your own body fat. How much energy do you actually have in the fat in your body? Let's find out. So fat has a lot of energy. For example, I've made here a candle out of fat. So this is using milk fat butter. So we could use something like this to actually figure out how much energy is in the fat in our body and actually how much energy is even in the food that we eat. So for example, let's say we wanted to know how much energy was in this Cheeto here. Well, in order to calculate that, all we do is take some water. And let's measure the temperature of our water. Okay, I get about 12.7 degrees Celsius. And then all we do is burn the Cheeto and see how much it heats up the water. Okay, now let's measure our temperature. So I get 32 degrees Celsius for the ending temperature. So how much energy does that come out to in a half a Cheeto there? Well, 1 calorie is the amount of energy to raise the temperature of 1 milliliter of water by 1 degree Celsius. So let's calculate how many calories or how much energy there was in that Cheeto. So the change in our temperature, we went from around 13 degrees Celsius to 32 degrees Celsius. So we changed by around 19 degrees Celsius. And we had 50 milliliters of water. So 50 times 19 equals 950. So that means in that half a Cheeto, we had 950 calories. So that is around 4,000 joules of energy. Now, if you watch your calories, this should seem confusing to you because I just told you that in a half a Cheeto, there were 950 calories. But let's look on our bag of Cheetos here. So in an entire bag, it says there's 140 calories. So how are we so off in our calculation? Well, the reason is because there's actually 2 uses of calorie. Calorie with a capital C actually means a kilocalorie, so 1,000 normal calories. So this is actually 140,000 calories. So in our half a Cheeto, we had 950 calories, or we had 0.95 calories with a capital C. Now you may wonder why we burn stuff to figure out how much energy our body's gonna get from it, but you have to remember that burning is actually the same process that our body does. Our body just does it a lot slower. So the end products of burning are just carbon dioxide and water. And the end products of things that we metabolize is also just carbon dioxide and water. So it doesn't matter the process that we go to get to those end products, the change in energy is the same. So we can actually just burn stuff to figure out how much energy our body can get from it. So we can see how much energy is actually in a little tiny Cheeto, but how much energy is actually in our stored fat in our body. So fat is a very energy dense material. In a kilogram of fat, there's around 38 million joules of energy. But the hard part is how can we convert that energy into movement? So in order to figure out how hard it is to convert energy to movement, let me show you a little experiment called the film canister rocket experiment. So I have here a spark generator with the wires connected through this film canister lid here. So you can see this creates a spark. So the goal of this experiment is to see how much movement we can get by igniting something. So in this case, what I'm going to be using is just some methanol. So I'm just going to put around 3 drops of methanol in here. Now watch what happens when I ignite it. 3, 2, 1. Watch this again. 3, 2, 1. Holy cow. So essentially what we made here is a mini rocket. Let's launch this Lego guy. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so with just 2 to 3 drops of methanol, we were able to launch this canister. It can go about 2 meters in the air. So it seems like maybe not a stretch to think that the energy from our own body fat could get us into orbit. So how much energy would it take to get into orbit? So to be in orbit, imagine that this were planet Earth. A lot of people might mistakenly believe that an orbit is somewhere like this, orbiting around Earth. But when in reality, for example, the International Space Station orbits around right here. So barely off the surface of the Earth relatively is where the International Space Station orbits. Now we can't orbit further away from Earth or closer to Earth than the International Space Station, and depending on how fast we're going, that's the distance that we need to be in order to orbit. Because remember that in order to get into orbit, it's not about how high you can go, but it's about how fast you can go. So when a rocket ship takes off, it's not about shooting straight up in the air, but it's about moving sideways as fast as you can. Because in order to stay into orbit, the thing that's orbiting has to be moving as fast as it can so that it doesn't fall back to the Earth. Because if it's not moving fast enough, so let's say for example that it shoots off like this, it'll shoot off in a parabola and then fall back down. And shoot off and fall back down. But if you can shoot it fast enough, then you shoot it fast enough so that it's falling at the same curvature that the Earth is curving. So if you shoot it fast enough, it'll shoot and it'll just keep falling around the Earth. So being in orbit just means that you're falling around the Earth. So you have to be going extremely fast to stay in orbit. And that's why you're weightless in space, because you're falling. So it's basically like you're always just falling through the air. So there is gravity, of course. You're only this far away from Earth, so of course there's still gravity, but the reason you don't feel it is because you're falling. So let's calculate how much energy is needed to orbit at the orbit of the International Space Station. So the International Space Station is going around 17,000 miles per hour. That's an insanely high speed. For example, a bullet goes around 800 miles per hour. I'm talking 17,000 miles per hour. So let's say we were trying to get our body to go that fast at that high. Let's see how much energy that would take. So the amount of energy to get a 65 kilogram person in orbit around the height of the International Space Station. So let's just calculate the minimum amount of energy required. So to lift something 250 miles in the air, you just do gravity times mass times height, and that's around 250 megajoules. And then to calculate the energy needed to move something 17,000 miles per hour, you just take the kinetic energy, which is 1/2 mass times velocity squared. You can see that in order to get something in orbit, almost all of the energy needed is to make it move really fast sideways, not to get up in the air. This is only 250 megajoules needed, and this is 1900 megajoules needed. So the total needed is 2150 megajoules. And remember I told you that there's around 32 megajoules per kilogram of fat. So if we just divide this by 32 megajoules, that means we need around 67 kilograms of fat. So in order to put a 65 kilogram person in orbit, you need 67 kilograms of fat. Now that's not a whole lot of fat. So somebody that's around 150 pounds overweight has enough fat on them and with enough energy in it to actually put their non-fat body into orbit. But it's not that easy. You may have a problem with what I just said, because actually what we calculated was the energy it took to lift a 65 kilogram person this high in the air and to move them 17,000 miles per hour sideways. But that's not what would happen if we tried to use their fat as energy, because remember we needed 67 kilograms of fat. And so if you add the 67 kilograms of fat at the beginning, then it takes more energy to lift them up, and it also takes more energy to move it because you have to move that extra 67 kilograms. And this is the central problem of rockets, because they have to carry their fuel with them. So the fuel that you need to put something in orbit makes the thing weigh more, and because it weighs more, that means you need more fuel to lift it up, and the more fuel you need, it means you need more fuel to lift it up. And so you can see that it seems like, how could we ever get anything into orbit? But the answer is, luckily, as we use up our fuel, our weight decreases. And so you can actually use mathematics to calculate how much fuel you would need to finally end up with your smaller mass in orbit. And the second problem is this: I calculated the amount of energy needed to put that person in orbit as if all of the energy from that fat was used to put them in orbit. But let's see if that's even possible in any way. For example, in my experiment with the film canister, it seemed like I was getting pretty good efficiency. I was able to launch this around 2 meters in the air with only 2 to 3 drops of methanol. So in 2 drops of methanol, we have around 750 joules. So we were able to get our canister to go up 2 meters in the air. The canister weighs around 2 grams. So you just do mass times gravity times height, and that's the energy needed to get that high in the air. And so I calculated that needs around 0.078 joules of energy. 0.078. And the amount of energy in those 2 drops of methanol was around 750. That means that I was only able to extract around 0.01% of the energy to actually launching it up in the air. All of that other 99.9% of energy was lost to heat and deformation and sound. That may help you appreciate your car. So the engine efficiency of your car is around 20% compared to this 0.01% efficiency of this film canister rocket. Our bodies are around that same level. We have about 20% efficiency. So around 20% of all the energy we take in can actually be used for actual work. The rest is just lost to heat or not being used at all. The most efficient internal combustion engine is around 50% efficiency, which is really awesome. But still, that's only 50% of the energy you put in is actually used for work that you can actually move something with. And rockets themselves can range around 17 to 65% efficiency. And this is using the best fuel available to maximize efficiency. So you can see that theoretically, the energy equivalent that's contained in the fat of a person can be enough to actually be the same energy equivalent of somebody orbiting in space. But in actuality, converting that energy to actually putting someone in orbit is utterly impossible with that fat. Because of the amount of extra fat needed to lift them off in the air, the rocket problem, and then also because the energy efficiency needed to convert that fat into usable work energy to move them. So in the end, fat does have a lot of energy, but it's not going to be able to be used to launch you into space. Hey everybody, thanks for watching another episode of the Action Lab. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified when my latest videos out. And head to theactionlab.com if you haven't checked out the subscription box. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.